The courtroom was already tense when Staff Sergeant Tyler Pierce rolled through the double doors in his wheelchair. Dressed in a fitted blazer and pressed slacks, medals pinned discreetly to his chest, Tyler moved with calm control, not weakness. He wasn't the defendant. He wasn't the prosecutor. He was simply there to make a public statement in support of his friend, an Afghan interpreter denied a visa, now facing deportation. But the judge wasn't having it. Judge Harold Klein, 61, leaned back in his chair as Tyler's wheelchair came to a stop at the center of the courtroom. The room had gone quiet, eyes turned toward the veteran, waiting to see what he would say, but Klein smirked. "Is this supposed to be symbolic?" he asked loudly, tapping a pencil against his bench. "Rolling in here like that?" A few gasps echoed from the gallery. Tyler blinked slowly. "Excuse me, Your Honor," audibly now. "Look, Sergeant, we all respect your service, but this isn't a VA ceremony. You're not testifying. You don't even have standing in this matter. So maybe roll back a bit and let the court do its work." That moment, it changed everything. One reporter in the gallery began typing furiously. A woman in the back pulled out her phone and hit record. And Tyler? He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked up and said, "5 minutes from now, Your Honor, you're going to regret laughing." Judge Klein scoffed. "Is that a threat, Mr. Pierce?" Tyler's voice was razor-sharp and low. "No, but it is a promise." And as the bailiff stiffened and murmurs rippled through the courtroom, no one, not even the smirking judge, realized they were already in the middle of a national moment, one that would be replayed, quoted, dissected, and remembered. Not because a man in a wheelchair was mocked, but because the man on the bench forgot who he was dealing with. For 5 full seconds, the courtroom didn't move. No rustling papers, no gavel. Just the echo of the veteran's words hanging in the air like smoke. Judge Klein adjusted his robe. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone he'd just tried to publicly humiliate. His voice, sharper now, cut through the silence. "Sergeant Pierce, you're out of order." Tyler didn't even blink. "No, sir. I'm just not out of courage." Several people in the gallery looked up. Some of them knew who he was. Others didn't, yet. But a few pulled out their phones. Someone whispered, "Isn't that the guy from the Kandahar blast?" He was. Staff Sergeant Tyler Pierce, 39 years old, had lost both legs in an IED explosion 7 years prior while pulling 2 wounded Marines out of a burning vehicle. He'd refused evacuation until everyone else was out. He'd been awarded the Silver Star, and he had never once asked for pity. But today wasn't about medals. It was about truth. "My interpreter, Farid Nazari," Tyler said, turning his chair toward the gallery, "saved my life. Twice. He pulled me out of a ditch after the blast. He took a bullet to the shoulder, keeping me alive until evac arrived." He glanced toward the defendant's table, where a nervous man with tired eyes and a slight limp sat beside his lawyer. "He carried me when I couldn't crawl." Judge Klein sighed. "This is irrelevant." Tyler raised his voice just enough to silence the room. "Irrelevant? The man who carried me when I bled out in the dirt is about to be deported by a court that won't even let him speak." People murmured. One reporter turned her phone toward the judge's face. He looked less amused now, less smug. The bailiff took a cautious step forward. And then Tyler wheeled toward the prosecution table. "You want to know what's relevant," he said, voice tightening. "I have photos, documents, official memos from U.S. Army intelligence stating that Farid was an approved Tier 1 asset with security clearance. I sent those to your office 2 weeks ago. They were ignored." He reached into a side pocket on his chair and pulled out a folder, fat, stamped, and labelled. "Do you want to explain why this court never admitted Exhibit B?" The courtroom gasped. Judge Klein's lips parted, but nothing came out. Because Tyler had just put the entire court system on trial. All eyes locked on the thick folder in Tyler's lap. The seal was unmistakable. U.S. Army, DOD. It wasn't a prop. It wasn't theatre. It was real. The judge leaned forward now, his smugness beginning to dissolve. "Mr. Pierce, that's inadmissible unless—" Tyler cut him off. "Unless what? Unless someone who can walk hands it in." A wave of quiet tension rolled across the courtroom. He held the folder up. "These aren't my words, Your Honor. These are official reports, operation logs, debriefs, emails between my unit's command and your federal liaison. Someone decided this evidence didn't matter. Someone buried it." The bailiff stepped forward again, but Tyler calmly handed the folder to Fareed's attorney, who turned pale, just flipping through the top 5 pages. The lawyer stood up. "Your Honour, I respectfully request an immediate recess. We have just been handed military intelligence documents that not only validate Mr. Nazari's role in protecting US soldiers, but also indicate clear failure by this court to review material evidence." Judge Klein tried to regain control. "This is highly irregular. These proceedings—" Tyler raised his voice again, sharp as steel. "These proceedings were irregular the moment you mocked my injuries instead of hearing the truth." Murmurs turned to murmured applause. Someone from the press whispered, "This is going to blow up online." Tyler wheeled closer to the front. "I didn't come here to be a spectacle. I came because justice shouldn't depend on the mood of the man behind the bench. You laughed at me for needing wheels, but I've carried more weight in war than you've ever faced in peace." Judge Klein's face flushed. And then, for the first time, he made a mistake. "You're dangerously close to contempt, Sergeant." Tyler leaned forward. "I've lived through fire. I've buried brothers. I've watched a man die with my name in his last breath. If you think I fear your contempt, you haven't seen real courage." The room erupted in low applause. Outside, footage was already trending. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. Headlines were forming. "Veteran silences judge with dossier of truth. Courtroom turns after mocked soldier speaks." Inside, the clerk leaned toward the judge and whispered something. And that's when it got worse, for the judge. Judge Klein's clerk leaned in quietly, but the courtroom was so still, the words might as well have been on loudspeaker. "Your Honour, the documents check out. They match with records from Army intelligence. We never logged them into evidence because—" She hesitated. "Because someone marked them as inadmissible before the case even hit your docket." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Who?" She didn't answer. But everyone saw her glance toward the prosecutor's table. Tyler saw it too. He turned his chair slowly, methodically, toward Assistant U.S. Attorney Morgan Dell, a sharply dressed man in his 40s who suddenly looked like he'd been caught without body armor. "You did this," Tyler said evenly. "You buried the truth. You let politics override promises, and now you're trying to deport the man who carried me bleeding through enemy fire." Dell adjusted his tie. "These documents weren't confirmed at the time of the filing. They were confirmed the day I sent them. I tracked them. They were opened, ignored, then flagged." Gasps erupted from the gallery. Dell opened his mouth again, then shut it. The judge looked shaken. For the first time since Tyler rolled in, Klein's voice trembled. "Mr. Dell, is this true?" I need a recess to—" "You'll get one, after I report this to federal oversight." Tyler didn't gloat. He didn't raise his fists in victory. He just turned back to Fareed, the interpreter, who sat silent through the chaos, and gave him a slow, steady nod. Fareed's eyes welled. Then someone from the gallery stood up. Then another. Then another. Veterans, teachers, civilians, all in silence. All standing for a man in a wheelchair who just turned a courtroom upside down without raising a hand. Judge Klein slammed his gavel. "Enough! Sit down or I will clear this gallery." But no one moved. And that's when the courtroom doors opened, again. 2 U.S. Marshals entered, moving directly toward the bench. "Judge Klein," one said, "we've been sent by the Federal Inspector General's office. There's been a complaint, a serious one, about judicial misconduct and suppression of military-affiliated evidence." Klein paled. "You can't just—" "Yes, we can." And then it happened. The air in the courtroom turned electric. No one spoke. Phones were out. Cameras were rolling. You could hear hearts pounding from the front row to the back. Judge Klein rose halfway from his chair, robe shifting, voice shaking. "This is a misunderstanding. These are exaggerated accusations from an outsider." The senior marshal cut him off. "Sir, we've reviewed the complaint, the ignored documents, and footage from this morning's proceedings. You mocked a disabled veteran in open court and suppressed military evidence relevant to a federal asylum request." He paused, then added with gravity, "That's not just inappropriate, it's illegal." Klein's jaw tightened. "I'm a sitting federal judge." "You were," the marshal replied, pulling out a document from his coat. "Effective immediately, you're relieved of your docket, pending investigation. We've been authorized to escort you from the courtroom. If you resist, we are prepared to proceed with restraint." The entire gallery gasped as Klein took a step back, stunned. "You're arresting me?" he stammered. "I've been on this bench 25 years. And in 5 minutes you'll be behind it," Tyler muttered, barely loud enough to be heard. It echoed anyway. The bailiff, torn between loyalty and duty, stepped aside. As the marshals flanked Judge Klein and began reading his rights aloud, Tyler Pierce didn't move. He didn't smirk. He didn't speak. He simply watched, and so did the world. By now, live streams had begun. The story was already going viral. Judge laughs at disabled vet, gets arrested minutes later. Justice in a wheelchair rolls over corruption. Sergeant Pierce versus the bench, the 5-minute turnaround. Fareed sat in stunned silence, eyes fixed on the judge now being handcuffed in the very courtroom where he thought he'd win with silence and arrogance. One of the students in the gallery whispered, "I'll never forget this day." Another muttered, "That's what justice really looks like." And outside, veterans began to gather, not shouting, not chanting, just standing. Uniforms old and faded, flags folded under arms. Silent tribute for one of their own who just reminded America what courage actually looks like. With Judge Klein now escorted out in handcuffs, the courtroom stood in a stunned, almost reverent stillness. No one cheered. No one moved. It wasn't a victory people celebrated. It was justice people had witnessed. Tyler Pierce sat in silence, hands resting on his wheels, watching the bench that once stood high now feel hollow. For the first time in his life, he hadn't won a battle with bullets or orders, but with truth. Farid, sitting at the defense table, whispered, "Why did you come today, Tyler? You didn't have to." Tyler glanced over, voice low but steady, "Because I remember what you did for me when no one was watching. I wasn't about to let you be forgotten when everyone was." Then came the sound of slow clapping. It wasn't dramatic, not thunderous, just a single pair of hands, starting from the back, an older man in a brown leather jacket, Vietnam veteran's cap on his head, then another, then a third. It wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement. A standing ovation would have felt performative. This was reverence. The acting judge, a woman named Judge Eliza Monroe, stepped quietly onto the bench from chambers. She had seen everything through the glass panel behind the court, her eyes locked with Tyler's. "I've reviewed the exhibits," she said calmly, "and I've seen the conduct of this courtroom." She nodded toward Fareed. "This case is no longer under threat. The petition for permanent residency will be reviewed not as an immigration form, but as a service recognition. And Sergeant Pierce, your testimony, though unsolicited, was the most constitutionally protected thing spoken in this building today." The court recorder kept typing, but the real record was already out there, being shared, replayed, posted, and reposted by the millions. A journalist tweeted, "Today I watched a man with no legs stand taller than the justice system itself." A viral caption read, "One man in a wheelchair reminded America what standing up really means." Tyler adjusted his jacket, now suddenly aware the world had shifted under him. And not just inside this courtroom. Outside, the crowd had grown. Veterans, civilians, journalists, teachers, students. Dozens became hundreds, quiet, respectful, holding up signs that read, "We don't leave our own behind." Justice rolled in. Fareed is one of us. Inside, Judge Monroe looked up again. "This court belongs to the people," she said, "and today the people have spoken." Outside the courthouse, the crowd swelled beyond the steps. Camera crews arrived. News vans pulled in. Veterans from different wars, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, stood shoulder to shoulder, some in uniform, some in wheelchairs, some leaning on canes. None of them came for attention. They came for Tyler Pierce. Inside, the court had recessed, but the energy didn't die down. Fareed's attorney sat dumbfounded, flipping through the documents Tyler had submitted. "You had this all along?" he asked. Tyler gave a half smile. "Had it, lived it, carried it. I was just waiting for the moment people would listen. Call it instinct, call it experience. But Tyler knew the court of public opinion moves faster than legal briefs ever could, and today it had moved in a way no one could control. Fareed finally found his voice. "They always told us to trust the system." Tyler looked over. "We are the system, brother, and sometimes it just forgets that." In the hallway, a staffer from the Office of Congressional Veterans Affairs approached with a statement. "Sergeant Pierce," she said carefully, "we've just been asked to present you with a formal congressional invitation. There's talk of reviewing all interpreter cases denied since 2018. Tyler blinked. "Why now?" She nodded at the courtroom. Because you just turned 5 minutes of truth into a national turning point. The hallway began to fill with people. A student from a local school, barely 16, walked up nervously and held out his hand. My grandfather served, he said. I never got to know him, but after today, I think I understand him a little better. Tyler shook his hand, steady. Then he'd be proud of you for being here. At that moment, his phone buzzed. He looked down. Trending #1 worldwide, Stand with Tyler. Over 3 million views in 4 hours. Headline on national news, Judge laughs at disabled vet. 5 minutes later, he's the one in handcuffs. Tyler sighed, just loud enough for Fareed to hear. I didn't want to go viral. Fareed smiled softly. You didn't. Honor did. Behind them, someone in the hallway began humming quietly, America the Beautiful. Not loud, not for attention, just enough for people to feel it in their bones. And in that courthouse, for the first time in a long time, the system wasn't a wall, it was a window. By morning, every major network had picked up the story. Disabled veteran silences corrupt judge. Justice wheels forward, viral courtroom moment sparks federal review. He was laughed at, now he's leading reform. Tyler Pierce didn't sleep much that night, not because of excitement, but because of the weight. Not just of attention, but of responsibility. The next day, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs issued a formal statement praising Tyler's courage and calling for a national review of interpreter visa denials and veteran advocacy cases. Congressional offices flooded with emails, and in cities across America, Boston, Atlanta, Phoenix, even Anchorage, veterans rolled into local courthouses wearing medals again. Not in protest, in solidarity. Back in Jefferson County, Judge Eliza Monroe reconvened the court the following afternoon. This time, the gallery was standing room only, not because of scandal, but because people believed again. Today, she said as she opened session, we correct what never should have been broken. Mr. Nazari, your residency status is hereby granted permanently, with honors for your service to the United States. Fareed froze, then looked at Tyler with tears in his eyes. He tried to speak but couldn't. Tyler nodded. You already said everything, brother, on a battlefield, when it counted. A crowd outside erupted in cheers as the news broke. Later that evening, Fareed's son, a quiet boy of 8, was asked by a reporter, Do you understand what happened today? The boy looked at Tyler, smiled shyly, and said, That man saved my dad, then saved him again. Inside his modest apartment that night, Tyler stared at the folded letter from the Department of the Army confirming Fareed's vital role. He'd carried it with him for years. Now, it would finally be placed in a proper file. Not in his pocket, but in Fareed's citizenship record. A voicemail came in from a senator. We'd like you to testify before Congress on veteran-related oversight. This could be the beginning of something bigger. Tyler didn't answer right away, because this wasn't about platforms. It was about principle. And the echo from that courtroom, where he once rolled in mocked and rolled out as a symbol, was still shaking windows across the country. By the end of the week, Tyler Pierce had received over 15,000 emails, some from veterans, others from teachers, judges, even foreign interpreters still waiting in visa limbo. One message stood out, from a Gold Star widow. My husband never came home from Fallujah. Today, for the first time in years, I felt like someone remembered what he gave. Thank you. Tyler didn't know how to respond, so he didn't. Not yet. He just read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it in the same place he used to carry field maps, in the chest pouch closest to his heart. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, his name came up in 5 different hearings. A bipartisan coalition introduced a bill, the Nazari Act, designed to fast-track military interpreters for protected status. Within 48 hours, 38 senators signed on. News anchors replayed the clip. The moment the judge mocked a wheelchair-bound man, the moment Tyler turned, calm as thunder, and said, You'll regret that. And then, the moment the judge was handcuffed in front of the country. Schools showed the story in civics classes. Veterans were invited to speak on campuses. One 9th-grade teacher in Illinois wrote on her whiteboard, Courage doesn't always walk in. Sometimes it rolls. Tyler's life changed, but not in the way fame usually does. He didn't hire a PR agent. He didn't tour talk shows. Instead, he visited VA hospitals quietly, sat with the amputees, the shell-shocked, the forgotten. He told them what happened, then listened to what still wasn't happening. One night back at the same courthouse, Judge Monroe invited him to speak at a local civic award ceremony. Not for the cameras, not for headlines, just to remind people why the system exists. Tyler wheeled to the front of the chamber, folded speech in hand, but didn't read from it. "I wasn't supposed to be the story," he began, "but maybe the system needed to hear a story that couldn't be ignored." He glanced at the same bench where Judge Klein once sat. That gavel isn't supposed to intimidate people into silence. It's supposed to protect the voices that haven't been heard. He looked out at the crowd. "And if a man in a wheelchair had to remind this country of that, then I'll roll into every courtroom in America if I have to." A beat of silence. Then the entire room stood. For a man who couldn't. 6 months later, the mural was finished. It wasn't loud or flashy, just a simple painting on the inside wall of Jefferson County Courthouse. It showed a man in a wheelchair, not saluting, not posing, just rolling forward, head up, shoulders square, folder in his lap, truth in his hands. Behind him stood dozens of faded silhouettes, interpreters, soldiers, teachers, judges, students, figures blurred but rising, together. Above it, one phrase painted in bold: "He rolled in alone, but left the nation standing." The artist never signed their name. They didn't have to. Inside, the courtroom where it all happened was now referred to quietly among staff as Pierce's Hall, a place where something broke, but something bigger began. Tyler Pierce didn't come back often, not because he was avoiding it, but because he didn't need to. Justice had already echoed loud enough. Fareed Nazari was now a permanent resident and full-time staff translator for a veteran legal advocacy center. He traveled the country with Tyler, speaking at universities and law schools. He told the story, not of war, but of what happened after it, of how silence almost swallowed justice, and how a man with no legs refused to let that happen. Former Judge Harold Klein, disbarred, investigated for suppressing federal evidence in multiple cases. He never returned to the bench. In one powerful twist of fate, the final ruling came from Judge Monroe herself, who wrote, "Justice delayed is dangerous. Justice mocked is criminal. But justice delivered, even in a wheelchair, is still the most powerful force in a democracy." Tyler was offered positions, interviews, campaigns. He declined most of them. Instead, he founded the Rolling Honor Project, dedicated to protecting veterans, foreign allies, and whistleblowers lost in the legal system. Its motto was simple: "We carry truth forward." On the 1-year anniversary, the courthouse hosted a quiet ceremony. No cameras, no microphones. Just people who'd been changed by what they saw that day. And Tyler? He sat quietly in the front row, hands folded. When someone asked if he had any final words, he smiled. "Yeah," he said. "Next time someone rolls in with the truth, don't laugh." He wheeled out slowly, fading into the dusk, the mural just behind him. And across the country, the system, flawed, fractured, often slow, kept moving just a little better. Because one man made it remember how to stand again.